The morning sun spilled through the towering windows of the Caldwell estate, casting long, golden bars across the white marble floors. The house, a modern colonial nestled in the heart of Greenwich, Connecticut, was a study in perfection. Its manicured lawns stretched like green velvet, framed by hedges trimmed to geometric precision. Inside, every surface gleamed, the countertops polished to a mirror finish, the crown molding dusted weekly by an invisible army of cleaners, and a crystal chandelier in the foyer that caught the light like a frozen waterfall. But for all its grandeur, the house felt like a stage set, beautiful, cold, and hollow, as if it had never learned to hold laughter. In a corner room on the second floor, painted in soft blues and creams with a nautical theme, Clara moved with quiet purpose. She knelt beside a small wooden chair, her hands deftly buttoning a crisp white shirt on a squirming 5-year-old boy. Ethan's dark curls bounced as he fidgeted, his sneakers tapping against the floor. "Hold still, sweetheart," Clara murmured, her voice low and warm, like a melody that didn't belong in the sterile perfection of the estate. She brushed a curl from his forehead, and he giggled, his hazel eyes sparkling. "I'm not a baby," Ethan declared, puffing out his chest, though he leaned into her touch, craving it like a flower turning toward sunlight. Clara smiled, her worn hands pausing for a moment. "Oh, I know, big guy," she said, adjusting his collar. "But even big guys need to look sharp for the day." She'd heard that defiant tone before, ever since Ethan was a toddler, barely able to string sentences together. She'd been there through his first words, his scraped knees, his late-night fears of monsters under the bed. She'd rocked him through fevers, taught him to tie his shoes, and turned the alphabet into a game with animal crackers on the kitchen counter. To Ethan, she was the center of his world. But to the Caldwells, she was just the nanny, efficient, quiet, replaceable. Downstairs, the sharp click of heels announced Lillian Caldwell's arrival precisely at 8 a.m., as it did every morning. A tall, elegant woman in her early 40s, Lillian descended the grand staircase like a queen surveying her domain. Her blonde hair was swept into a flawless chignon, her tailored silk blouse and pencil skirt chosen by a personal stylist from Manhattan. Everything about her was curated, from her pearl earrings to the way she carried herself, as if perfection was her birthright. She didn't raise her voice. It might crease her composure, but her words could slice through the air with surgical precision. She entered the nursery without knocking, her eyes flicking briefly to Ethan, who was now tugging at his socks. "Clara," she said, her tone clipped, bypassing any greeting. "Please ensure Ethan doesn't make a mess before the guests arrive this afternoon, and wear something neutral. The navy uniform, preferably." "Yes, ma'am," Clara replied, her voice steady, her face a mask of calm. She didn't meet Lillian's gaze, not out of fear, but because she'd learned long ago that in homes like this, eye contact was an invitation for scrutiny. Lillian turned on her heel, her heels echoing like a metronome as she left. To her, Clara was part of the machinery of the house, like the polished banisters or the imported roses in the entryway. Necessary, but not noteworthy. Clara smoothed Ethan's shirt one last time, her fingers lingering on his shoulder. "You ready? For breakfast, champ?" she asked, forcing a brightness into her tone. "Pancakes?" Ethan asked, his eyes wide with hope. "Only if you promise not to get syrup on your shirt," she teased, leading him toward the kitchen. He grabbed her hand, his small fingers wrapping around hers, and for a moment, the house didn't feel so empty. The Caldwell kitchen was a masterpiece of stainless steel and white cabinetry, designed more for photo shoots than family meals. Clara settled Ethan at the island with a plate of pancakes cut into bite-sized pieces, the crusts of his toast neatly trimmed, just the way he liked. She moved quietly, wiping the counter as he ate, her navy skirt blending into the background. She was used to being invisible here, her presence reduced to the tasks she performed: packing lunches, folding tiny clothes, soothing tantrums that Lillian never saw. But Ethan saw her. When he scraped his knee on the patio, he didn't run to his mother's office or his father's study. He ran to Clara, who cleaned the wound with gentle hands and distracted him with stories about talking squirrels. When nightmares woke him, it was Clara's voice that calmed him, singing lullabies she'd once sung to another child, in another life. She never spoke of that life here. The Caldwells didn't ask, and Clara didn't offer. But every night, when Ethan was asleep and the house was silent, she retreated to her small room off the laundry hall. The room was modest, barely larger than a closet, with a twin bed, a single dresser, and a rug worn thin at the edges. It smelled faintly of lavender and starch, a faint rebellion against the lemon polish that permeated the rest of the estate. Clara sat on the bed's edge, her hands steady as she opened the top drawer of her dresser. Inside was a small wooden box, its varnish chipped from years of quiet handling. She lifted the lid, revealing a photograph, its edges frayed, its colors softened by time. A little girl no older than Ethan beamed up at her, her pigtails tied with red ribbons, her smile missing a front tooth. Lily. Clara's fingers brushed the photo, her breath catching. "Good night, my girl," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of the washing machine down the hall. She closed the box, returning it to the drawer, and shut her eyes. The ache never left, but she'd learned to carry it, to let it fuel the love she gave to children who weren't hers. She wasn't just caring for Ethan, she was keeping a piece of Lily alive. The morning of the gala buzzed with a frenetic energy, not of joy, but of performance. Lillian Caldwell was orchestrating what she called a charity luncheon, though it was less about giving and more about being seen giving. The backyard was transformed into a vision of elegance, white linen tents, tables draped with silk, and centerpieces of peonies flown in from a boutique farm in upstate New York. Caterers arranged canapes with tweezers, and landscapers trimmed the lawn twice to ensure no blade stood out of place. Lillian moved through it all like a general, her Bluetooth earpiece blinking as she issued orders with a smile that never reached her eyes. Clara watched from the kitchen window, her hands busy packing Ethan's lunch for the day, a turkey sandwich, with the crusts cut off, a handful of grapes, and a note tucked inside that read, "Be your brave self." She wore the navy uniform Lillian had requested, a high-collared, shapeless dress that seemed designed to erase her. It fit perfectly, yet made her feel like a shadow. She pressed it that morning with the same care she gave to Ethan's clothes, her fingers moving with practiced ease. It was remarkable, she thought, how something could fit so well and still make you disappear. "Mommy Clara!" Ethan's voice broke through her thoughts as he burst into the kitchen, a smear of peanut butter on his cheek and a crayon clutched in his fist. He barreled into her legs, wrapping his arms around her waist. "Look, I drew a boat." Clara knelt, wiping the peanut butter with a damp cloth. "That's a fine boat, Captain," she said, admiring the wobbly lines and bright blue scribbles. "Is it sailing somewhere special?" "To the moon," Ethan declared, his grin infectious. Lillian appeared in the doorway, her heels clicking sharply against the tile. Her eyes narrowed at the sight of Ethan clinging to Clara. "Ethan," she said, her voice tight, "how many times have I told you? Clara is not your mother." Ethan's face fell, confusion clouding his eyes. He looked up at Clara, who kept her expression neutral, though her hand rested gently on his shoulder, tracing small circles. "I'm sorry, Mommy Clara," he whispered, his voice small. Lillian's jaw tightened. "Enough of that," she snapped. "Clara, please ensure he's ready for the guests. No stains, no fussing." She turned without waiting for a response, her heels fading into the hum of the house. Clara didn't flinch, but the words lingered, sharp as a paper cut. She bent to Ethan's level, brushing his cheek. "You're doing great, sweetheart," she said softly. "Let's get you cleaned up for the party, okay?" He nodded, still clutching his drawing, and followed her to the sink. The chef, a wiry man named Marco, leaned over from the counter where he was plating hors d'oeuvres. "Sometimes," he muttered, glancing toward the hallway, "I wonder who really runs this place." Clara didn't respond, but the comment stayed with her as she washed Ethan's face and tucked his drawing into her apron pocket. She knew her place here, silent, efficient, unseen. But to Ethan, she was the one who made the world make sense. By noon, the Caldwell estate was a portrait of high society. The backyard glowed under the July sun, with string lights twinkling above tables set with crystal stemware. Guests arrived in a parade of designer dresses and tailored suits, their laughter polished and practiced. The air smelled of peonies and privilege, underscored by the soft hum of a string quartet playing Vivaldi near the koi pond. Lillian glided through the crowd, her white linen dress catching the light, her smile, a perfect balance of warmth and control. She was in her element, introducing Ethan as our little gentleman to guests who cooed over his bow tie but never asked about his favorite dinosaur. Clara stayed in the background, moving through the back hallways with a tray of iced tea, pitchers. She adjusted Ethan's collar one last time before sending him into the crowd, his small hand clutching a juice glass like a trophy. "Stay close to your mom," she whispered, smoothing his hair. He nodded, but his eyes scanned the sea of faces, searching for her even as he joined the party. From the edge of the tent, Clara watched, her navy dress blending into the shadows. No one noticed the woman who had spent her morning tying Ethan's shoes and cutting his sandwiches into triangles. She was part of the architecture, as essential and invisible as the tent poles holding up the event. Lillian, meanwhile, charmed, her guests with anecdotes about Ethan's private school and her latest philanthropy project. "We've worked so hard to raise him right," she said to a guest, her voice dripping with practiced humility. Clara's hand tightened slightly around the tray's handle, but her face remained impassive. She'd heard it all before. The way Lillian claimed credit for Ethan's manners, his kindness, his curiosity, as if Clara's hours of care were just a footnote. Then it happened. Ethan, standing beside his mother, caught sight of Clara near the dessert table. His face lit up like a firework. "Mommy Clara," he shouted, his voice cutting through the quartet's melody. Before anyone could react, he darted through the crowd, weaving between silk dresses and pressed slacks, a cookie crumbling in his hand. He flung his arms around Clara's waist, smearing chocolate across her dress. "I saved you a cookie," he said proudly, holding up the half-eaten treat. The tray in Clara's hands tilted, but she caught it with the steady grace of someone used to balancing chaos. The guests froze, their champagne flutes hovering mid-sip. A woman gasped. A man chuckled nervously. Lillian's smile stiffened, her eyes narrowing as she stepped forward. "Ethan," she said, her voice sharp but controlled. "Clara is just the nanny. You know that." Ethan looked up at Clara, confused, his arms still wrapped around her. Clara bent to his level, her voice soft. "I see you found your sweet tooth again," she said, brushing crumbs from his cheek. Her eyes held a warmth that no one else in the tent could claim, but beneath it was a flicker of something heavier. Grief, restraint, love held back by rules. Lillian forced a laugh, high and brittle. "He gets confused sometimes," she said, to the crowd, waving a hand as if to dismiss the moment. "You know how children are." But Ethan didn't let go. He pressed his face into Clara's dress, leaving another smear of chocolate. To him, the rules didn't matter. All he knew was the woman who made him feel safe. The quartet resumed, the notes bright and forced, but the air had shifted. A tension lingered, sharp as the clink of crystal, and no amount of champagne could wash it away. The Caldwell estate shimmered under the golden afternoon sun, its backyard a stage for Lillian Caldwell's meticulously planned charity luncheon. The white linen tents glowed, their edges fluttering in the soft Connecticut breeze. Crystal flutes sparkled in the hands of guests, each sip of champagne accompanied by the delicate clink of glass and the murmur of rehearsed laughter. The string quartet shifted to a lighter melody, as if trying to erase the awkwardness of Ethan's outburst. But the moment lingered, a faint crack in the polished facade of the event. Clara stood at the edge of the tent, her navy uniform blending into the shadows of the pergola, her hand steady as she refilled a pitcher of iced tea. Ethan, now back at his mother's side, clutched his juice glass, his small face clouded with confusion. Lillian moved through the crowd with renewed determination, her smile a carefully calibrated weapon. She leaned toward a guest, a doctor's wife in a pale pink dress, and laughed lightly. "Children and their imaginations," she said, her voice smooth as silk. "He's so attached to the nanny, you know how it is." The woman nodded, her pearls catching the light. but her eyes darted toward Clara, curiosity flickering. Lillian followed her gaze, her lips tightening for a fraction of a second before she turned to greet another guest, a tech executive with a Rolex that gleamed as brightly as his teeth. Clara felt the weight of those glances, though she didn't meet them. She'd learned to navigate homes like this, where every look carried judgment, every word a boundary. She adjusted the tray in her hands, her movements precise, and slipped back toward the kitchen. Inside, the air was cooler, scented with lemon polish and the faint tang of fresh herbs. Marco, the chef, was arranging shrimp canapes with the focus of an artist, his apron dusted with flour. He glanced up as Clara entered, his dark eyes softening. "You okay?" he asked, his voice low. Clara nodded, setting the tray on the counter. "Fine," she said, though the word felt hollow. She busied herself wiping down the pitcher, her hands moving automatically. Marco didn't push, but he lingered, slicing cucumbers with a rhythm that suggested he had more to say. "Kid's got a point," he muttered after a moment. "You're more family to him than they are." Clara's hands paused, but she didn't respond. She couldn't afford to. Not here, where every word could be overheard, where loyalty was a job requirement, not a choice. She glanced at the clock, 2:15 p.m. The keynote speaker was due soon, and Lillian had made it clear that Clara was to stay out of sight unless absolutely needed. She smoothed her dress, the navy fabric stiff against her skin, and headed back. To the tent, her steps silent on the tiled hallway. Outside, the gala was reaching its peak. Guests mingled under the string lights, their conversations a hum of wealth and ambition. Lillian stood near the center of the lawn, a glass of sparkling rosé in her hand, her posture impeccable. She was preparing for the toast, the moment she'd rehearsed in her mind for weeks. The quartet's music softened, signaling the shift. Conversations hushed, and champagne flutes rose in anticipation. Clara positioned herself near the serving station, partially obscured by a trellis draped with ivy. She wasn't meant to be part of this moment, only to refill drinks and fade away. Lillian cleared her throat, her voice carrying with practiced grace. "To friends, to family, to the beauty of giving back," she began, her eyes scanning the crowd with curated warmth. The guests smiled, their glasses catching the sunlight. Ethan stood beside her, his bow tie slightly askew, his small hands fidgeting with his juice glass. Clara watched from her corner, her heart tightening as she saw the way he scanned the crowd searching for her. Then it happened again. Ethan's voice, clear and unapologetic, cut through the air like a bell. "Mommy Clara," he shouted, his small arm pointing directly at her. "I want to sit with Mommy Clara." The crowd froze. A woman in a lavender hat gasped, her flute tilting, spilling a drop of champagne onto the grass. A man in a navy blazer lowered his glass, his eyebrows rising. Whispers rippled through the guests like a breeze through dry leaves. "Did he just say?" someone murmured. Lillian's smile faltered, her glass dipping as the color drained from her face. She forced a laugh, high and brittle, like glass about to shatter. "He's just confused," she said, turning to the stunned guests. "You know how children are. Clara's the nanny, that's all." But Ethan wasn't confused. He pushed past his mother, weaving through the sea of tailored suits and silk dresses, his sneakers leaving faint smudges on the grass. He reached Clara, grabbing her hand with both of his eyes wide and trusting. "You're my mommy, right?" he said, his voice soft but certain. "You love me more than her." The silence was deafening, a pin-drop moment that swallowed the quartet's notes and the clink of glasses. Clara's heart thudded in her chest, her hands trembling as she knelt to his level. Her voice came out in a hush, thick with emotion. "Sweetheart," she said, her eyes brimming. "I love you so much." She brushed his cheek, her thumb catching a crumb from his earlier cookie. The crowd watched, some with curiosity, others with discomfort, their perfect world disrupted by a child's truth. Lillian stepped forward, her composure cracking into something sharper. "Clara," she snapped, her voice low but venomous. "Return to the kitchen immediately. This is completely inappropriate." The word inappropriate hung in the air like an accusation. Clara didn't move right away. She stayed on one knee, holding Ethan's hands, his small body pressed against her. For a moment the gowns, the glasses, the curated perfection of the gala meant nothing. Only the boy, the woman who loved him, and a truth no one wanted to hear. Then, from the edge of the lawn, a new figure emerged. Dr. Maya Torres, the keynote speaker, stepped through the crowd, her tailored gray suit catching the light. She was young, barely in her 30s, with deep brown skin that glowed under the sun and hair swept into a sleek twist. Her presence commanded attention, not just for her reputation as a rising star in pediatric medicine, but for the quiet authority in her stride. She'd been featured in Forbes last month, lauded for her work in underserved communities, but here, she was just another guest until her eyes landed on Clara. Maya stopped mid-step, her breath catching. She stared for a moment, disbelief softening into something tender. The crowd parted as she walked directly toward Clara, who was still kneeling with Ethan. "Clara?" Maya's voice wavered, a mix of shock and recognition. Clara looked up, her world freezing for a split second. Her lips parted, her eyes widening. "Maya," she whispered, her voice barely audible. The two women met in an embrace that seemed to collapse time. Maya's arms wrapped around Clara, her voice breaking as she murmured, "I can't believe it. I didn't know you were here." Clara pulled back, her hands still holding Maya's. "Look at you," she said, her voice soft with awe. "You're all grown." Tears filled Maya's eyes as she squeezed Clara's hands. "You were the first person who believed in me," she said, her voice trembling. "When I was just an angry kid in foster care, everyone gave up on me except you. You brought me books, read with me every week, even when I pushed you away. You told me I was smart before I believed it myself." Clara smiled faintly, her own eyes glistening. "I always knew," she said. "I'm a doctor because of you," Maya said, her voice breaking. "Everything I am, everything I have. You started it." The chatter around them died down. Guests turned, their champagne forgotten, their cameras lowering. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. There, in front of the same crowd that had barely acknowledged Clara's existence, a renowned physician was openly, emotionally embracing the woman they'd dismissed as the help. A woman in a silk scarf leaned toward Lillian and whispered, "Who is she?" Lillian's smile faltered, her fingers tightening around her glass. "I thought she was just the nanny," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Maya turned to the crowd, still holding Clara's hand. Her voice rose, clear and resolute. "She's not just anything," she said. "She's the reason I'm standing here today." The air shifted, the weight of her words settling over the lawn like a tide. A few guests exchanged nervous glances, their discomfort palpable. One man near the back pulled out his phone, the red dot of a recording blinking to life. Another guest, a gallery owner with a penchant for social media, tapped out a post. "This woman just changed everything." Unsung heroes. Lillian's face was a mask of control, but her eyes betrayed her. The perfection she'd spent years cultivating, her image, her home, her story, was trembling like a house of cards. She stepped forward, her voice tight. "Dr. Torres, we're so grateful for your presence," she said, attempting to steer the moment back to her script. "Perhaps we should move to the keynote." But Maya didn't budge. She looked at Clara, then back at the crowd. "I wasn't planning to speak yet," she said, her tone calm but unyielding. "But I can't stay silent. You see this woman? Right here?" She gestured to Clara, who stood quietly, her navy dress still smudged with Ethan's chocolate. "Most of you didn't notice her before today. Maybe you called her the help. Maybe you didn't call her anything at all. But let me tell you something. People like her raise people like me." The crowd was silent now, the quartet's music fading into the background. Ethan, still clinging to Clara's hand, looked up at Maya, his eyes wide. Clara's heart pounded, but she didn't speak. She didn't need to. Maya's words were doing what she never could, making her seen. "Don't you dare call her just a nanny," Maya continued, her voice sharpening. "She saw something in me when I was invisible, When I had no family, no direction, she gave me time, attention, kindness. She spoke to me with dignity when I didn't know how to hold my head up. And I'm not the only one. She paused, her eyes scanning the crowd. I've learned she's been pouring love into other people's children for over a decade, shaping lives while being ignored in rooms like this. A hush fell over the lawn. The guest with the phone kept recording, the video already streaming. To thousands online, comments poured in from strangers, caregivers, children raised by women like Clara. She sounds like my nanny, one wrote. She taught me to read when my parents were too busy, another posted, attaching a photo of a toddler on a woman's lap. Hashtags trended. Chakra caregivers matter. Chakra see the invisible. Lillian stood frozen by the beverage table, her forced smile cracking. Under the weight of the truth, her guests were no longer hers to command. Their attention belonged to Clara, to Maya, to the story unfolding in front of them. Even James Caldwell, who had arrived late and lingered at the edge of the crowd, shifted, uncomfortably, his briefcase still in hand. Clara felt the eyes on her, the weight of being seen after years of invisibility. She didn't raise her voice or seek the spotlight. She simply stood, holding Ethan's hand, her quiet strength a contrast to the chaos around her. Ethan nuzzled closer, his small voice whispering, "I love you, Mommy Clara." Lillian's composure snapped. She stepped forward, her voice low but cutting. "Clara, take Ethan inside, now." Clara nodded, her face calm, though her heart ached. She gently guided Ethan toward the house, his small hand warm in hers. The crowd parted, their eyes following her, some with admiration, others with unease. Marco and a maid standing at the kitchen entrance watched in silence, their expressions heavy with unspoken support. Inside, Clara led Ethan to the kitchen, where she sat him at the island with a glass of water. His eyes were red, his lip trembling. "Why is Mommy mad?" he asked, his voice small. Clara knelt, brushing his hair back. "She's just trying to do her best, sweetheart," she said, though the words felt like a lie. "You didn't do anything wrong." Ethan nodded, but his eyes searched hers, looking for the reassurance only she could give. Clara's throat tightened, but she smiled, tucking his drawing from earlier into his pocket. "Keep this safe, okay?" she said. "It's our boat to the moon." He giggled, the sound fragile but real. Clara stood, smoothing her dress, the chocolate smear, now a badge of his love. She knew what was coming. She'd seen it in Lillian's eyes, heard it in her tone. This wasn't just a moment to be swept under the rug. It was the end of her time here. That evening, the estate settled into its usual hush, the guests gone, the tents dismantled, the lawn pristine once more. Clara retreated to her room, the door clicking shut behind her. She locked it, not because anyone would come looking, but because she needed a space where the weight in her chest could breathe. She sank onto the bed, her hands trembling as she opened the wooden box in her dresser. The photo of Lily stared up at her daughter's crooked smile a mirror of Ethan's. "I couldn't save you," Clara whispered, her voice cracking. "But maybe I saved someone else." Her mind drifted to the worst day of her life, 12 years ago in a Brooklyn hospital. The fluorescent lights had been too bright, the air too sterile. Lily, only 4, had a fever that wouldn't break, a cough that rattled her small frame. Clara had begged the nurses to see her sooner, but they dismissed her, told her to wait. Hours passed, each one heavier than the last. By the time a doctor examined Lily, it was too late. Pneumonia had turned to sepsis. Clara remembered, the moment they told her Lily was gone. The world went silent, then exploded inside her. Her knees hit the floor, her scream swallowed by the hospital's walls. She hadn't fully come back from that day, but she'd kept moving, becoming a nanny not because she wanted to, but because she couldn't stop mothering. Her love had nowhere else to go, so she gave it to children like Ethan, even if they'd never be hers. And now, even after being sent to the kitchen like a scolded servant, she knew she hadn't stopped being a mother. She'd just done it in secret. The next morning, the house was cloaked in an uneasy silence, the kind that follows a storm. Lillian sat in the sunroom, swirling a cup of chamomile tea she didn't plan to drink. Her jaw was tight, her eyes unreadable, but the tension in her shoulders betrayed her. She'd spent the night spinning the gala's story for her friends, laughing off Ethan's outburst as childish confusion. But the video of Maya's speech was everywhere now, shared across social media, commented on by strangers who saw Clara as a hero. Lillian's inbox was flooded with requests for comment, and the same socialites who'd once ignored Clara now claimed they'd always admired her. James arrived mid-morning, his briefcase in hand, his presence as rare as it was unwelcome. "This is a mess," Lillian said, not looking up from her tea. "She's too attached to Ethan. It's unhealthy for him and for our image." James raised an eyebrow, leaning against the doorway. "If it's bad for appearances, let her go. We can find another nanny." Lillian nodded, her decision made. "She undermined me in front of everyone," she said, her voice cool. "And Ethan, calling her mommy like it's normal. That's not what we pay her for." That afternoon, Clara was summoned to the study, a room she rarely entered except to deliver linens. She stepped inside, her hands folded, her face calm, despite the dread curling in her stomach. Lillian sat behind the desk, her posture rigid. James stood by the window, already disengaged. "We've decided," Lillian began, her tone clipped, "that your time with us will conclude at the end of the month. We'll provide a reference, but it's best for everyone if we part ways." Clara nodded, her voice steady. "I understand." But a shriek pierced the air from the hallway. "No, no, no, no!" Ethan burst into the room, his face red, his eyes wide with panic. He'd been listening, his small ear pressed to the door. "You can't make her go!" he cried, throwing himself at Clara's legs. "I want Mommy Clara!" Lillian moved to pull him away, her face flushed with embarrassment. "Ethan, stop this at once," she snapped. "You're making a scene." But the scene was already made. Marco and a maid stood frozen at the kitchen entrance, their eyes welling. Clara knelt, cupping Ethan's tear-streaked face. "It's okay, sweetheart," she said softly. "You're going to be all right, I promise." "I want you to stay," Ethan whimpered, his voice breaking. "You're my mommy." Clara's heart cracked, not for herself, but for him. She rose, smoothing her dress. "I'll start packing," she said simply. Lillian gave a curt nod. James had already left the room. Ethan clung to Clara's skirt until she gently unclasped his hands, her touch loving but final. The days following the gala passed in a blur of calculated order at the Caldwell estate. Fresh orchids bloomed in the foyer, their petals pale and perfect. The banisters gleamed with lemon-scented polish, and not a single toy lay out of place. The house had returned to its pristine stillness, as if Ethan's outburst and Maya's speech had never happened. But beneath the surface, something fundamental had shifted. The air carried a quiet tension, like the pause before a storm breaks. Clara moved through her final tasks with the same steady grace she'd always shown. She folded Ethan's clothes, packed his lunch with the crusts cut off, and tucked a note inside that read, "You are enough." She didn't linger in the nursery, didn't let her eyes rest too long on the nautical-themed walls or the stuffed whale Ethan loved. Each action was deliberate, a way to keep the ache at bay. She knew this was no longer her place, if it ever had been. The Caldwells had made that clear. Lillian, as always, redirected her energy into reputation management. The viral video of Dr. Maya Torres's speech had sparked a deluge of attention. Articles in local papers, posts on social media, even a segment on a morning talk show. Strangers shared stories of caregivers who'd shaped their lives, tagging Clara's name when they learned it. China Caregivers Matter trended for days, alongside photos of nannies, teachers, and foster parents who'd been invisible until now. Lillian's inbox overflowed with requests for interviews, most of which she ignored. Instead, she planned her next event, a charity auction to benefit a children's hospital, not out of passion, but because it photographed well. She wore a soft blush dress for the occasion, chosen for its elegance in flash photography, and smiled as if the gala had never faltered. James, predictably, was absent, his briefcase a constant companion as he jetted between New York and London. When he was home, He avoided Clara's gaze, muttering to Lillian about overreactions and bad optics. The staff, however, Marco the chef, the maids, the gardener, watched Clara with quiet respect. They didn't speak of the gala, but their small gestures spoke volumes. A cup of coffee left on the counter for her, a maid lingering to help fold linens, a nod from the gardener as she passed. They saw what the Caldwells refused to. Ethan was the hardest part. He clung to Clara whenever she was near, his small hands gripping her skirt, his eyes wide with questions he didn't know how to ask. "Why can't you stay?" he'd whisper. At bedtime, his voice muffled against her shoulder as she read him Goodnight Moon. Clara would smooth his curls and say, "You'll always be in my heart, sweetheart." But the words felt inadequate against his tears. She taught him to count stars through his window, to name them after things he loved: pancakes, boats, her. It was her way of leaving him something permanent, something the Caldwells couldn't erase. On her last day, Clara packed her belongings in silence. Her room, with its twin bed and worn rug, seemed smaller than ever. She didn't have much to take: a suitcase of clothes, a few books, the wooden box with Lily's photo. Tucked inside her coat pocket was Ethan's crayon drawing of their boat, to the moon, its lines wobbly but fierce. She smoothed it carefully, her fingers lingering on the words he'd scrawled in shaky letters. Mommy Clara. She didn't cry. Not yet. There was work to finish. A goodbye to survive. Lillian summoned her to the study one final time, her tone as clipped as ever. "We've arranged for a replacement to start next week," she said, not looking up from her planner. "Your reference letter is on the desk. We appreciate your service." The words were polite but hollow, like the house itself. Clara nodded. "Thank you, ma'am," she said, her voice steady. She took the letter, its envelope crisp and impersonal, and turned to leave. But as she reached the hallway, a small, desperate voice broke the silence. "Clara, wait!" She turned to see Ethan running down the path from the nursery, his sneakers pounding against the marble floor. His cheeks were flushed, his eyes brimming with tears. He crashed into her legs, his arms wrapping around her waist. "Don't go," he pleaded, his voice raw. "Please don't go." Clara knelt, cupping his face. The wind from an open window ruffled his curls, and her own eyes shimmered with the ache of every goodbye she'd never been allowed to say. "You'll always be in my heart," she whispered, her voice full and soft. "But you belong to them now, sweetheart. Be brave. Be kind, and remember what I taught you, especially when no one's looking." Ethan nodded, tears spilling down his cheeks. She kissed his forehead, her lips lingering for a moment, then gently stood. He clung to her hand until she unclasped it, her touch loving but final. She walked through the foyer one last time, past the chandelier and the orchids, her suitcase rolling quietly behind her. The gates of the Caldwell estate closed with a soft clang, not a finality, but a freedom. A month later, on a quiet street in Hartford, far from the glittering suburbs of Greenwich, a modest building opened its doors. Its windows were painted, with handprints in every shade of joy: red, blue, yellow, green, smudged and imperfect, each one a testament to the children who'd left them. The sign above the entrance was simple, bold blue letters on a white background: Lily's Place, a home to heal. Inside, the air was alive with laughter, real and unfiltered, the kind that echoed off crayon-streaked walls and bounced through. Reading nooks shaped like treehouses. Rows of tiny shoes lined the entrance, some scuffed, some new, all belonging to children who were learning to trust again. Clara stood in the center of it all, a clipboard in one hand, a stuffed bear in the other. Her gray sweater was speckled with glitter from the morning's art project, her hair pulled into a loose bun that caught the sunlight streaming through the windows. She didn't wear a uniform here. She wore love like a second skin, unguarded and whole. The children moved around her like a tide, some shy, some bold, all drawn to her quiet warmth. A little girl named Amara whispered a secret in her ear, her voice barely audible. A boy named Javier proudly showed her his drawing of a rocket ship, its flames bright orange. Another child, a quiet boy named Malik, flinched at a loud noise, and Clara crouched beside him, her hand steady on his shoulder until his breathing calmed. This was no grand estate, no showcase of wealth. The floors were scuffed hardwood, the furniture second-hand but sturdy. Bookshelves overflowed with dog-eared paperbacks, and a corner held a pile of mismatched pillows where children napped or read. It smelled of paint and cookies, of life being lived rather than displayed. Clara had started small on purpose, turning down offers from publishers wanting her memoir, non-profits offering to fund a larger center, even a city council member who saw her story as a campaign boost. She didn't need their validation. What children needed wasn't perfection, it was presence, and Clara had that in spades. At the back of her office, a small space with a desk and a single window, hung a simple frame. Inside was Ethan's drawing, wrinkled at one corner, showing two stick figures holding hands under a lopsided sun. One was labeled Ethan, the other, Mommy Clara. Beside it was the wooden box, open now with Lily's photo resting on the desk. Her daughter's smile, crooked and bright, seemed to watch over the room. Clara didn't hide it anymore. She didn't need to. This place was her truth, stitched from pain and turned into purpose. The idea for Lily's place had come in the quiet days after she left the Caldwells. The viral video of Maya's speech had brought attention, but it was the letters that followed. That changed everything. They came from strangers, former foster kids, single mothers, teachers, who'd seen Clara's story online. A woman in Ohio wrote about her nanny who'd taught her to tie her shoes when her parents were too drunk to care. A man in Chicago shared a photo of himself as a boy, sitting on his caregiver's lap, reading The Very Hungry Caterpillar. "You reminded me of her," he wrote. "She was my home when I didn't have one." Clara read each letter, her hands trembling, and realized she wasn't alone. Her love, her loss, had ripples she'd never seen. With savings from her years as a nanny and a small grant from a local foundation, Clara leased the building in Hartford. It was a fixer-upper, with peeling paint and creaky floors, but it had good bones and big windows. She painted the walls herself, enlisted volunteers to sand the floors, and scoured thrift stores for furniture. Maya, now a friend as much as a former charge, helped with the paperwork, her medical credentials lending weight to the grant applications. "You're doing what you did for me," Maya said one evening as they sorted donated books. "Giving kids a chance to be seen." Clara smiled, stacking a pile of picture books. "I'm just giving them what I had left," she said. "What I couldn't give Lily." Maya squeezed her hand. "You're giving her legacy a home." The center opened quietly without fanfare. The first children came through word of mouth. Kids. From foster care, from struggling families, from parents working double shifts who needed a safe place for their little ones. Clara didn't advertise, she didn't need to. The handprints on the window spread the word, each smudge a story of trust. She hired a small staff, a retired teacher, a young artist, a social worker in training, all people who understood that love was in the details, a tied shoelace, a listen-to story, a bandage on a scraped knee. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low, casting golden light through the windows, Clara gathered the children in the main room for story time. They sprawled on the mismatched pillows, some nestled against her, others tugging at her sweater. Amara, the shy girl, leaned against her shoulder, her braid brushing Clara's arm. Javier waved his rocket ship drawing, eager to share. Clara opened a worn copy of Where the Wild Things Are, her voice melodic and calm, one hand turning pages, the other resting protectively on Malik's back. The room was alive with giggles, gasps, and the soft rustle of turning pages. There was no applause, no spotlight, just love unfolding in 1,000 unseen moments. Clara no longer wore the mask of restraint she'd carried at the Caldwell estate. Her laughter was unguarded, her presence complete. She was no longer a shadow. In someone else's story, she was the heartbeat of this one. The children didn't call her Mommy Clara, but they didn't need to. Their trust, their small hands reaching for hers, said it all. As the story ended, Amara looked up, her eyes wide. "Will you be here tomorrow?" she asked, her voice small, but hopeful. Clara smiled, brushing a braid from her face. "Every day, sweetheart," she said. "I'm not going anywhere." The words felt like a promise, not just to Amara, but to Lily, to Ethan, to every child she'd ever loved. She glanced at the framed drawing on her desk, Ethan's stick figures under their crayon sun, and beside it, Lily's photo, her smile eternal. Clara hadn't just left a house behind. She'd built a home, one where every child who walked through, the doors wasn't just cared for. They were seen, they were heard, they were loved. Months later, Clara received a letter, its envelope creased from travel. She recognized the handwriting immediately. Ethan's shaky scrawl, guided by an adult's hand. Inside was a new drawing, a house with a bright yellow roof, a stick figure boy standing beside a woman with a gray sweater. "I miss you, Mommy Clara," he'd written. "I'm being brave, like you said." Clara held the drawing to her chest, her eyes closing. She didn't cry. Not anymore. The ache was still there, but it had softened, woven into the joy of the children around her. She tucked the drawing into the frame beside Lily's photo, two pieces of her heart side by side. The sun set outside, bathing Lily's place in a warm, golden glow, its windows like lanterns filled with life. Small hands waved paintbrushes, giggles echoed off the walls, and Clara moved through it all, her presence steady, her love unending. True motherhood, she knew, wasn't measured by blood or titles. It was in the sacrifice, the presence, the quiet moments that shaped a child's soul. Clara had lost her own daughter, but in giving her love to others, she'd found a way to keep mothering. And in the laughter of the children at Lily's place, she heard Lily's voice, Ethan's giggle, and the echo of every child she'd ever held. She was no longer invisible. She was home.